The bullet missed Eleanor Whitfield's head by less than 3 inches, splintering the wooden post behind her as she stood frozen in the dusty main street of Redemption, Texas, watching her father's murderer ride away into the harsh summer sun of 1878. Eleanor's hands trembled as she gripped the porch railing, her dark blue dress covered in the dust kicked up by the outlaw's horse. She had come to Redemption 3 weeks ago to take over her late aunt's boarding house, never expecting to witness her father being gunned down in cold blood during what should have been a simple business transaction. The man who pulled the trigger was Silas Crawford, a cattle rustler who had been terrorizing the territory for months, and he had killed her father over a disputed land deed that would have exposed Crawford's illegal operations. The town sheriff was nowhere to be found, probably drinking away his afternoon at the saloon as usual. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was truly alone now. Her mother had passed during childbirth when Eleanor was just a girl, and her father had been her only family. At 23 years old, she found herself orphaned in a town where justice seemed as rare as rain in the Texas summer. She turned to go back inside the boarding house when she heard the steady clip of horse hooves approaching. A tall figure rode up slowly, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out the features of a man in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted with practiced ease, "I saw what happened from the ridge. Name's James Cordell. I've been tracking Crawford for 2 weeks now. He killed my partner over in San Angelo, stole our cattle, and burned our ranch to the ground." Eleanor studied him carefully. His face was honest, bearing the kind of lines that came from squinting into the sun during long days of hard work rather than from cruelty or deceit. There was something in his eyes that mirrored her own pain, a recognition of loss that ran deeper than words could express. "Eleanor Whitfield," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "That man just killed my father. The sheriff here would not lift a finger even if his own mother was shot in front of him." James tied his horse to the hitching post and stepped onto the wooden walkway, removing his hat respectfully. "I'm real sorry for your loss, Miss Whitfield. No person should have to witness such a thing. Crawford's gotten away with too much for too long. The law's been bought off in half the counties between here and the New Mexico territory." "So what do we do?" Eleanor asked, surprised at the determination in her own voice. "Let him ride off into the sunset while good people suffer?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," James replied, his jaw set with purpose. "But I could use someone who knows this territory. I'm a stranger here, and Crawford's got eyes everywhere. You know these parts?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "I grew up about 50 miles north of here before my aunt brought me to Redemption. I know every canyon, every water source, and every town between here and the Oklahoma border. My father taught me to track when I was just a girl. He wanted me to be self-sufficient." James looked at her with a mixture of respect and concern. "It's dangerous work, Miss Whitfield. Crawford rides with at least 3 other men. They're killers, every one of them." "My father is dead," Eleanor said flatly. "Danger seems to have already found me, whether I went looking for it or not. Besides, I can shoot better than most men in this town. My father made sure of that too." A slight smile tugged at the corner of James's mouth. "I believe you, but we need to be smart about this. Crawford's headed west based on the tracks. There's an old mission about 30 miles from here where he's been known to hole up. If we leave before dawn, we might be able to get ahead of him, set up somewhere with a good vantage point." Eleanor felt a spark of something she had not experienced in years, maybe ever. It was not just the desire for justice or revenge, though those feelings certainly burned within her. It was the sense that she was finally taking control of her own destiny, making choices that mattered. "I'll need to make arrangements for the boarding house. I have 3 guests staying here who'll need their meals." "I can help with that," came a voice from behind them. Mrs. Patricia Hartwell, a widow who lived 2 doors down, stepped forward. She had been watching from her window. "You go do what needs doing, Eleanor. I'll look after things here. Your father was a good man. He helped my son find work when we had nothing. It's the least I can do." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. I do not know how long I will be gone." "You take whatever time you need, dear. Just come back safe." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Eleanor packed supplies while James tended to the horses and checked their weapons. She changed into more practical clothing, a split riding skirt, and a sturdy cotton shirt that had belonged to her father. It still smelled faintly of his tobacco, and she had to pause for a moment, pressing the fabric to her face as grief threatened to overwhelm her. But there would be time for grieving later. Right now, she needed to focus on what came next. James was waiting by the horses when she emerged, her rifle slung over her shoulder and a pack of supplies in her arms. He took the pack from her and secured it to his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes. "We should get some rest," he said. "We will leave 3 hours before dawn. That will give us the cover of darkness for the first part of the journey." Eleanor nodded and showed him to one of the empty rooms in the boarding house. As she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, she found herself studying him when he was not looking. There was a quiet strength about James Cordell, a calmness that seemed at odds with the violence he had witnessed. He moved with purpose but without hurry, and when he spoke, his words were measured and thoughtful. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When James finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Tell me about your father." Eleanor set down her fork, surprised by the question. "He was a merchant. Dealt in dry goods mostly. He built his business from nothing, traveled all over Texas buying and selling. He taught me everything about running a business, about negotiating, about reading people. He said I had a sharp mind and it would be a waste not to use it." "Sounds like he was proud of you." "He was all I had," Eleanor said quietly. "And now he has gone because of a piece of paper and a greedy man's fear of being exposed." James reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, a gesture of comfort that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "We will make this right, Miss Whitfield. I give you my word." Something about the way he said it made her believe him. She looked into his eyes and saw not just determination but a deep sense of honor that seemed increasingly rare in this harsh land. They retired to their separate rooms as the last light faded from the sky. Eleanor lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barked, a door slammed. The wind rattled the shutters of her window. She thought about her father, about the life she had expected to live versus the reality she now faced. She thought about James Cordell and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. When James knocked softly on her door 3 hours before dawn, Eleanor was already dressed and ready. She had not slept much, but adrenaline coursed through her veins, sharpening her senses. They moved through the dark town like shadows, leading their horses until they were well clear of the buildings before mounting up. The Texas landscape stretched out before them, mysterious and beautiful in the pre-dawn darkness. The stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and the air was cool and clean. Eleanor had always loved this time of day, the quiet moments before the world woke up and the heat of the sun became oppressive. James rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or checking their direction. He was an experienced tracker, reading signs in the earth that Eleanor would have missed. They stopped once to water the horses at a small creek, and James showed her the tracks he had been following. 4 horses just like I thought, he said, crouching low to examine the prints. They passed through here maybe 6 hours ago. They're not in any hurry, which works in our favor. They think no one is following them. "How did you learn to track like that?" Eleanor asked, impressed by his skill. James stood and brushed the dust from his hands. "My father was a scout for the army before he retired and started ranching. He taught me everything he knew. Said a man who could not read the land was a man who would not survive long in this territory." "Is he still alive?" James's expression grew somber. "No, ma'am. He passed 2 years ago. Heart gave out. My mother followed him 6 months later. I think she just did not want to be without him." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. It seems we have both lost people we love. That's why we have to stop men like Crawford, James replied. So fewer people have to experience that kind of loss. They rode on as the sun began to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. The temperature started to climb, and Eleanor pulled her hat lower to shield her eyes from the glare. The landscape became more rugged as they traveled, with rocky outcroppings and deep arroyos cutting through the earth. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a large rock formation. James pulled out some dried meat and hardtack, and they ate while keeping watch on the horizon. "Tell me about your partner," Eleanor said. "The one Crawford killed." James was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Tom Brennan. We grew up together. Started the ranch together. He was like a brother to me. Crawford showed up one day claiming we were on his land, even though we had the deed to prove otherwise. When Tom tried to show him the papers, Crawford just shot him. Did not even hesitate. Then his men set fire to everything we had built." Eleanor could hear the pain in his voice, the barely contained anger. "How did you escape?" "I was out checking the fence line when it happened. By the time I got back, Tom was dead and everything was burning. I tracked Crawford for 3 days before I lost his trail near San Angelo. Then I heard he had headed this way, so I followed. I arrived in Redemption just in time to see him kill your father." "And you stopped to help me instead of going after him," Eleanor said, understanding dawning. "You could have continued tracking him." James looked at her directly, his gray-green eyes intense. "I could not leave you there alone, Miss Whitfield. Some things are more important than revenge." Eleanor felt her heart beat a little faster. There was something about James Cordell that drew her in, a combination of strength and gentleness that she had never encountered before. In the harsh world of the frontier, kindness was often seen as weakness, but James proved that a man could be both tough and compassionate. They continued their journey as the afternoon wore on, the heat becoming almost unbearable. Eleanor was grateful for her practical clothing and the water they had brought. James proved to be good company, sharing stories of his life on the ranch and asking about her experiences running the boarding house. They talked about everything and nothing, and Eleanor found herself laughing for the first time since her father's death. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, James pointed to a structure in the distance. "That is the old mission. We need to approach carefully. If Crawford's there, he will have someone watching." They dismounted and led the horses on foot, using the terrain to stay hidden. As they got closer, Eleanor could see the crumbling adobe walls of the mission, its bell tower long since collapsed. It looked abandoned, but James held up a hand to stop her. "Smoke," he whispered, pointing to a thin trail rising from behind the walls. "Someone's there." They tethered the horses in a protected spot and crept forward, keeping it low. James's hand rested on his pistol, and Eleanor checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As they peered through a gap in the mission wall, Eleanor could see 4 men sitting around a small fire. Crawford was easy to identify, his distinctive gray hat and cruel features unmistakable even from a distance. The other 3 men looked rough and dangerous, the kind of outlaws who lived by violence and cared nothing for human life. James pulled Eleanor back behind cover. "We cannot take them head on, not 4 against 2. We need a plan." "What if we wait until dark," Eleanor suggested, "and catch them while they sleep?" James considered this. "It is risky, but it might be our best option. We will need to take out whoever they post as a guard first, quietly, then we can get the drop on the others." They settled in to wait as the sun continued its descent. The sky transformed into a breathtaking display of oranges, pinks, and golds, the kind of sunset that made even the harsh Texas landscape look beautiful. Eleanor watched the colors shift and change, thinking about how strange it was that something so lovely could exist in the same world as the violence and cruelty they had witnessed. "It is beautiful, is it not?" James said softly, following her gaze. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "My father used to say that sunsets were God's way of reminding us that even the hardest days can end in beauty." James smiled. "Your father was a wise man. As darkness fell, they moved closer to the mission. Just as James had predicted, Crawford posted one man as a guard while the others bedded down for the night. James signaled for Eleanor to stay put while he circled around, moving with the silence of a shadow. Eleanor watched, hardly daring to breathe, as James approached the guard from behind. There was a brief struggle, quickly ended, and then James was waving her forward. They crept into the mission compound, their weapons ready. But their plan fell apart when one of the sleeping men woke and shouted a warning. Suddenly, the night exploded with gunfire and chaos. Eleanor dove behind an old water trough as bullets whizzed past her head. She returned fire, trying to aim carefully despite the adrenaline and fear coursing through her. James had taken cover behind the remains of a stone wall, exchanging shots with Crawford and his men. In the confusion and darkness, it was hard to tell who was where. Eleanor saw one of the outlaws trying to circle around James's position and fired, her bullet catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around. The fight seemed to last forever, but was probably only a few minutes. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Crawford's men were down, wounded but alive. The third had fled into the darkness. Crawford himself was cornered, his gun empty and James's pistol pointed directly at his chest. "It is over, Crawford," James said, his voice steady despite the violence they had just experienced. "You are going to answer for what you have done." Crawford sneered. "You think anyone cares? I own half the sheriffs in this territory. I will be out in a week." "Not this time," came a new voice. Eleanor turned to see a man wearing a marshal's badge step out of the shadows, followed by 3 deputies. "I have been tracking you for months, Crawford. We have enough witnesses and evidence to hang you 3 times over." Marshal William Garrett was a legend in Texas, known for his unwavering commitment to justice and his refusal to be bought or intimidated. His presence meant that Crawford would finally face real consequences for his crimes. James lowered his weapon, relief flooding his features. "Marshal Garrett, I did not know you were in the area." "Got word Crawford was heading this way," the marshal replied. "Figured I would set up a watch on this old mission since he has used it before. Good thing, too, looks like you 2 could have used the backup." The deputies secured Crawford and his wounded men while the marshal took statements from James and Eleanor. As they talked, explaining everything that had happened, Eleanor felt the weight of the past day finally catching up with her. Her legs trembled, and she had to sit down on a broken section of wall. James was at her side immediately, his hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Miss Whitfield. Your father would have been proud." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, and felt tears finally break free. All the grief and fear and anger she had been holding back came pouring out. James sat beside her and simply let her cry, not trying to stop her or tell her everything would be fine. He just stayed with her, solid and present, until the storm passed. Marshal Garrett arranged for them to ride back to Redemption with his deputies, while he transported the prisoners to the territorial prison. The journey back took most of the next day, and Eleanor found herself riding beside James, neither of them saying much, but both finding comfort in the other's presence. When they finally arrived in Redemption, the sun was setting once again, painting the sky in those same beautiful shades of gold and orange. Mrs. Hartwell came rushing out of the boarding house, relief written all over her face. "Thank the Lord you are both safe," she exclaimed, embracing Eleanor tightly. "The marshal sent word ahead that Crawford was caught. The whole town is talking about it." Over the next few days, life in Redemption slowly returned to normal. Eleanor buried her father in the town cemetery, and it seemed like half the population turned out for the service. She had not realized how many people her father had helped over the years, how many lives he had touched with his kindness and generosity. James stayed in town, helping Eleanor manage the boarding house and taking care of repairs that needed doing. He proved to be handy with tools and had a natural way with people that made him popular with the guests. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their morning conversations over coffee and the easy companionship they shared during the day. One evening, about 2 weeks after Crawford's capture, James found Eleanor sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset. He sat down beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might like some," he said, handing her one of the cups. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "It is beautiful tonight, is it not?" "It is," James agreed. "Though I have to admit I have been finding a lot of things beautiful lately." Eleanor glanced at him and saw that he was looking at her, not at the sunset. Her heart skipped a beat. "James." "I know it has not been long," he said quickly, "and I know you are still grieving your father. But Eleanor, I cannot help the way I feel. These past weeks with you have been the best I have had in a long time. You are strong and brave and smart, and I find myself not wanting to imagine a future that does not have you in it." Eleanor set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "It scares me a little, how quickly this has happened. But when I'm with you, I feel safe and understood in a way I have never experienced before." James took her hand gently. "I do not have much to offer. My ranch is gone, burned to the ground. But I'm a hard worker, and I will spend every day trying to build something good and stable. I want to do that with you, Eleanor, if you will have me." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes again, but these were different from the tears she had cried before. These were tears of joy and hope. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." James pulled her close and kissed her, tender and sweet, as the golden sunset painted the sky above them. It was a moment of pure beauty and promise, a beginning rather than an ending. Over the following months, James and Eleanor built a life together. James used his knowledge of ranching to help local farmers improve their operations, earning a reputation as a fair and skilled consultant. Eleanor continued running the boarding house, which thrived under her management. They were married in the spring of 1879 in a simple ceremony at the town church with half of Redemption in attendance. As Eleanor stood beside James, speaking her vows while the sunset painted the sky gold through the church windows, she thought about everything that had brought them to this moment: the tragedy and loss, the danger and fear, the slow building of trust and love. James looked at her with such devotion and sincerity that she knew without any doubt that he meant every single word he said. "I, James Cordell, take you, Eleanor Whitfield, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you and cherish you, to stand by your side through whatever trials come our way. I promise to build a life with you that honors both the memory of those we have lost and the hope of all we can become together. I promise to work hard every day to be worthy of your love and trust. This I vow before God and these witnesses, and I mean every word with all my heart." Eleanor felt her own vows come from somewhere deep inside, words she had not planned but that felt absolutely right. "I, Eleanor Whitfield, take you, James Cordell, to be my lawfully wedded husband. You came into my life in my darkest hour and showed me that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person. You have given me hope when I thought there was none left, and you have stood beside me when others would have walked away. I promise to love you with all that I am, to build our future together with courage and faith. This I vow before God and these witnesses, and I will keep this promise for all my days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the entire congregation erupted in applause. Mrs. Hartwell was crying openly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the usually stern shopkeeper, Mr. Peterson, was smiling broadly. The reception was held at the boarding house, which Eleanor and James had decorated with wildflowers and lanterns. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. James proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, whirling Eleanor around the floor until she was breathless with laughter. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Eleanor and James stood together on the porch where they had shared their first real conversation about the future. The sky was darkening now, stars beginning to appear like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Happy, Mrs. Cordell?" James asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Eleanor leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "When I lost my father, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could find this kind of joy again." "Your father would be glad to know you are happy," James said softly. "From everything you have told me about him, he wanted nothing more than your happiness and success." "I think he would have liked you very much," Eleanor said, turning in his arms to face him. "You are exactly the kind of man he always said I should look for. Someone with integrity and kindness and the courage to do what is right even when it is hard." James kissed her forehead gently. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to that standard." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The boarding house needed constant repairs and management, and there were times when money was tight. But James and Eleanor faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. James eventually saved enough to purchase a small plot of land just outside of town, where he started raising horses. He had a natural gift for it, and word spread quickly about the quality of his animals. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in the winter of 1879, and their first child, a son they named Thomas after James's late partner, was born in the summer of 1880. Holding their baby boy for the first time, Eleanor felt a completion she had not known she was missing. James was a devoted father, patient and loving, and watching him with their son made Eleanor fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah, after Eleanor's mother. The little girl had Eleanor's dark hair and James's gray-green eyes, and she was as spirited as she was sweet. Their family continued to grow, with another son, William, born in 1884. The horse ranch thrived, and eventually James and Eleanor were able to expand, purchasing additional land and hiring help. The boarding house remained successful, though Eleanor gradually handed over more of the day-to-day management to Mrs. Hartwell, who had become like a mother to her. Through all the years, through the challenges and triumphs, the laughter and tears, James and Eleanor never forgot where they had started. Every anniversary, they would stand together and watch the sunset, remembering that golden evening when they had spoken their vows and meant every word. On their 10th anniversary, as they stood on the porch of the ranch house James had built with his own hands, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and gold, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about that day at the old mission?" she asked James, who stood beside her with his arm around her waist. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It was the day justice was finally served, but more than that, it was the beginning of us. Everything good in my life now traces back to that moment when I decided to stop and help a brave woman who had just lost her father." "I was so angry and scared," Eleanor remembered. "I thought my life was ending. I never imagined it was actually just beginning." James turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You took a terrible situation and found the courage to fight back, to seek justice not just for yourself, but for everyone Crawford had hurt. That is who you are, Eleanor, strong and brave and unshakable. I have been honored every single day to walk through life beside you." Eleanor smiled, standing on her toes to kiss him. "And I have been honored to walk beside you, James Cordell. You are everything I never knew I needed, everything I always hoped existed in this world." Their children came running out then, Thomas, now a lanky 10-year-old, and Sarah, an energetic 8-year-old, and William, a rambunctious 4-year-old. They gathered around their parents, wanting to know what they were looking at. "Just the sunset, little ones," James said, scooping up William while Thomas and Sarah pressed close to their mother. "It is really pretty," Sarah observed, her child's eyes wide with wonder. "It is," Eleanor agreed. "Your grandfather used to tell me that sunsets remind us that even the hardest days can end in beauty." "Tell us about grandfather," Thomas requested. He had heard the stories many times before, but never seemed to tire of them. As the family settled on the porch, Eleanor began to tell the stories of her father, of the kind and generous man who had raised her to be strong and independent. She told them about the day her life had changed forever, though she simplified the details for young ears. She told them about how their father had appeared like a hero when she needed one most, and how together they had brought a bad man to justice. James added his own stories about his partner Tom and the ranch they had tried to build, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous. The children listened with rapt attention, as they always did. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Yes, she had lost her father, and that pain would always be a part of her. But from that tragedy had come something beautiful and lasting. She had found love with a man who truly saw her, who valued her strength and intelligence, who partnered with her in building a life worth living. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the normal joys and sorrows of life. The children grew, eventually starting families of their own. Thomas became a lawyer, dedicated to ensuring justice for those who could not afford it. Sarah married a teacher and opened a school in Redemption that welcomed all children regardless of their ability to pay. William took over the horse ranch, expanding it further and earning a reputation throughout Texas for his fair dealing in quality animals. James and Eleanor grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. They faced illnesses and setbacks, celebrated grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and never lost the ability to make each other laugh. Every sunset found them together, remembering the vows they had spoken as the sky turned gold, remembering that they had meant every single word. On a warm evening in the spring of 1920, as they sat together on the porch they had sat on countless times before, Eleanor took James's hand. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the years they had lived. "Have I told you today that I love you?" James asked, his voice still strong despite his age. "Only twice," Eleanor replied with a smile, "but I will never tire of hearing it." "I love you, Eleanor Cordell," James said seriously, "just as much today as I did when I first realized it, maybe even more. You have given me a life beyond anything I could have dreamed. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home and a purpose, but more than any of that, you have given me yourself, and that has been the greatest gift of all." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears that came from a heart so full it could barely contain the emotion. "And you have given me the same, my love. You showed me that it is possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure." As the sun set that evening, painting the Texas sky in those familiar shades of gold and orange and pink, Eleanor and James held each other close. They had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, a legacy of love and courage and integrity. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the values they had instilled, would remember the stories of how their family began, and on countless future evenings as those descendants gathered to watch the sunset, they would tell the story of the cowboy and the boarding house owner, of the vows spoken as the sky turned gold, of the love that had started in tragedy and grown into something that could never be diminished or destroyed. They would tell how James Cordell had meant every single word he said that day in the church, and how he had spent the rest of his life proving it through his actions, his devotion, his unwavering love. It was a story worth telling, a love worth remembering, a life worth living. And as the last light of that particular day faded into the gentle darkness of night, Eleanor and James Cordell sat together in perfect contentment, grateful for every moment they had been given, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had shared. Their story, like all the best stories, had found its happily ever after, not in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of unwavering commitment, genuine partnership, and a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. The vows they had spoken all those years ago as the sunset painted the sky gold had been kept, treasured, and lived out in full. James had meant every single word he said, and he had proven it day after day, year after year, until those words and the life they built together became inseparable, a testament to what is possible when two people find each other and choose to hold on through everything life brings their way.